Welcome back, historians. Greek beliefs. The Greeks believed in many gods and goddesses, and they told myths about them. Greek myths are traditional stories about gods and heroes. The Greeks believed these gods affected everyday life. Every city-state had a god or goddess who protected its people. The Greeks worshipped their gods in temples and at home. The Greek gods and goddesses had great powers. However, the Greek people did not fear them because the gods acted like humans. Greeks believed the 12 most important gods and goddesses lived on Mount Olympus and were protected by a gate of clouds. Zeus was the king of the gods. To please their gods, the people performed rituals, or religious ceremonies in honor of the gods. They had festivals, or celebrations, and feasts for the gods. They prayed and offered gifts to the gods. They believed that the gods were pleased when the people showed skill in the arts or athletics. Every 4 years they had athletic competitions, called the Olympic Games. The Greeks believed that the gods made prophecies, or predictions, to help people plan for the future. People who wanted to know the future or listen to other advice visited an oracle. This was a priestess who talked to the gods from a room deep inside a temple. People asked the priestess questions. She told her answers to the priests. Then the priests translated the answers. The most famous oracle was at the Temple of Apollo in Delphi. Epics and fables. Greek poems and stories are some of the oldest in the Western world. Many writers have used ideas from these old stories, like England's William Shakespeare. The earliest Greek stories were called epics. Epics are long poems about heroes and their brave deeds. Homer wrote 2 great Greek epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Homer wrote them both in the 700s BC. The Iliad tells of a war between the Greeks and the people of Troy. The story describes how this war was won with a wooden horse. The Odyssey tells about the hero, Odysseus, and his long journey home from the Trojan War. The Greeks believed that the Iliad and the Odyssey were true stories. These epics gave them a history filled with heroes and brave deeds. Homer's stories taught important lessons, such as, friendship and marriage should be valued. Homer's heroes were role models for the Greeks. Have you heard the story of the boy who cried wolf? This story and others like it were said to have been written by a man named Aesop. He is supposed to have lived around 550 BC. Historians now know that there was probably never anyone named Aesop who wrote these stories. However, the stories do exist. They are known as Aesop's fables. Fables are short tales that teach a lesson. They always have a point, or moral. The moral is a truth that teaches a useful life lesson. Fables are often funny and show human weaknesses and strengths. Aesop's fables were part of Greece's oral tradition for about 200 years. This means that people told the stories out loud to their children and grandchildren. Later, people wrote down the fables. Aesop's fables are read and told today by people all around the world. The impact of Greek drama. A drama is a story told by people who act out the events. They play the parts of the characters in the story, saying their words and acting out their feelings and actions. Movies, plays, and television shows are often dramas. The Greeks developed 2 types of drama, tragedy and comedy. A tragedy has an unhappy ending. The characters in a tragedy cannot solve their problems no matter how hard they try. The first Greek plays were tragedies. Later the Greeks wrote comedies. A comedy ends happily. Today, we use the word comedy to mean a funny story. For the Greeks, a comedy was any drama with a happy ending. In ancient Greece, women were not allowed to act. Men played all the parts, even the female characters. For the Greeks, dramas were part of religious festivals. Greek dramas dealt with big ideas, such as the meaning of good and evil and the rights of people. Greek art and architecture. Greek artists created art that expressed the ideals of order, balance, and harmony. This style of art is now known as the classical style. Greek artists painted on pottery, using red and black paint. Large vases often have pictures from myths. Small pieces, like cups, have pictures from everyday life. The Greeks built beautiful buildings. These buildings had large columns to support the roof. The most important buildings were the temples. Each temple was dedicated to a god or goddess. The Parthenon of Athens honored the goddess Athena. Many Greek temples were decorated with sculpture. Sculpture, like all of Greek art, expressed artists' ideas of perfection and beauty. Greek thinkers. The word philosophy comes from the Greek word for love of wisdom. Greek thinkers known as philosophers created a new body of knowledge that later shaped the Western world. A group of philosophers called the Sophists were teachers in ancient Greece. Sophists taught rhetoric, the art of public speaking and formal argument. Sophists did not believe that the gods influenced everyday life. They did not believe in absolute, or definite, right and wrong. They thought that something wrong for one person could be right for another. Socrates was trained as a sculptor but became a teacher of philosophy. We know about him from his students' writings. Socrates did not agree with the Sophists. He thought there was an absolute right and wrong. He thought all real knowledge was buried deep inside each person. Socrates tried to help people find the knowledge inside themselves through the Socratic method of teaching. This meant he did not lecture his students. Socrates asked them questions. He wanted them to think for themselves. Some leaders in Athens thought Socrates was dangerous. They said he encouraged people to question their leaders' decisions. In 399 BC, Socrates was arrested and found guilty of teaching young people to rebel. He was sentenced to death. Socrates could have left Athens, but he refused. He said that he lived in Athens, so he had to obey the city's laws. He drank poison to carry out his death sentence. Plato was one of Socrates' students. He wrote a book called The Republic. In it, he described his plan for the ideal society. Plato did not like Athenian democracy. He did not believe that everyone in society could make good decisions. His ideal government divided people into three groups. The top group was philosopher kings. Plato felt they were wise enough to do what was best for everyone rather than only what was best for themselves. Warriors were the second group in Plato's ideal society. Their job was to defend the society against attack. The third group was everyone else. They did all of the jobs in society that were necessary to provide food, clothing, and shelter. Plato believed that the common people were too easily influenced and would make foolish decisions. Unlike most men at that time, Plato believed that women should have the same education and the same jobs as men. Plato started a school in Athens. It was called the Academy. His best student was Aristotle. Aristotle wrote more than 200 works on government, science, and the planets. In 355 BC, Aristotle opened his own school called the Lyceum. His teaching focused on the idea that people should live moderately. His belief in observation, or looking at the world around him, was an important step in the development of modern science. Aristotle also wrote about government in his book Politics. He divided governments into three types. The first was monarchy, or rule by one person, such as a king. The second was oligarchy, or rule by just a few people. The third was democracy, or rule by the majority of the people. Aristotle thought that the best government was a combination of all three types. Aristotle's ideas influenced the founders of the United States government. New history and science ideas. For thousands of years, people did not write history. They believed that the legends and myths passed from one generation to the next were true. Then, in 435 BC, Herodotus wrote the history of the Persian Wars. Though he believed that the gods affected historical events, he tried to separate fact from legend. He was the first to do careful research. Today, he is called the father of history. Thucydides was another famous historian of the ancient world. He did not believe that the gods affected human history. Thucydides tried to write everything the way it actually happened. In ancient times, most people thought that the gods controlled nature. However, the early Greek scientists thought that people could discover the causes of natural events by observing, investigating, and thinking. The first important Greek scientist was Thales of Miletus. He made discoveries and developed theories by observing and thinking. Another Greek scientist, Pythagoras, believed that all relationships in the world could be expressed in numbers. He is famous for developing the Pythagorean theorem. It is still used in geometry to figure out the length of the sides of a triangle. Hippocrates was a physician who is called the father of medicine. He believed that diseases came from natural causes. He made important discoveries about different kinds of diseases. He also developed his own treatments to cure sick people. Hippocrates wrote a list of rules about how doctors should treat their patients. The rules are listed in the Hippocratic Oath. It says doctors should do the best to help the patient. It says they should protect the patient's privacy. Today, doctors around the world still promise to honor the Hippocratic Oath.
Philip II of Macedonia. Macedonia was a kingdom north of Greece. The people raised sheep and horses, and they farmed. For much of its history, Macedonia had not been a powerful country. In 359 BC, Philip II became king of Macedonia. He wanted to defeat the Persian Empire. First, he had to unite the Greek city-states and put them under his rule. Philip built a strong army and trained them to fight like the Greeks. The Greek city-states were weak. They had been divided by the Peloponnesian War. Philip took control of the city-states one by one. He defeated some in battle. He bribed some to give up. Others joined him by their own choice. Demosthenes was a lawyer and one of Athens's great public speakers. He warned that Philip threatened the freedom of the Greeks. He urged all the city-states to join together to fight the Macedonians. By the time the Greeks listened to Demosthenes, it was too late. In 338 BC, the Macedonians crushed the Greeks at the Battle of Chaeronea. Philip now controlled most of Greece. Alexander takes over. Before Philip could conquer the Persian Empire, he was killed. His son Alexander took over. Alexander was only 20 years old, but he had already been in battle many times. His father had put him in the Macedonian army when he was very young. By the age of 16, he was serving as a commander. Alexander invaded Asia Minor in 334 BC. He had about 40,000 soldiers. His cavalry, the soldiers who rode horses, crushed the Persian army at the Battle of Granicus. This area was located in what is today northwestern Turkey. Alexander's forces continued across Asia Minor. They freed Greek city-states that had been under Persian rule. In 333 BC, Alexander defeated the Persian army at Issus, in Syria. The Persian king, Darius III, had to run away. Then Alexander went south. In 331 BC he conquered Egypt. There he built the city of Alexandria, naming it after himself. It became one of the most important cities of the ancient world. Later that year, Alexander went northeast to Mesopotamia. He defeated Darius's forces at Gaugamela, near the Tigris River. After this victory, Alexander's army took over the rest of the Persian Empire. Alexander did not stop. In 327 BC he and his army marched into northwestern India. They fought a number of bloody battles. His soldiers grew tired of war, so Alexander agreed to lead them home. On the way there, the army crossed a desert in what is modern Iran. There was very little water. Heat and thirst killed thousands of soldiers. When soldiers found some water, they gave it to Alexander in a helmet. Alexander poured the water on the ground. He showed his soldiers that he was willing to suffer the same thirst and pain that they did. Alexander arrived back in Babylon in 323 BC. The journey and all the battles had wrecked Alexander's health. He died in Babylon. He was only 32 years old. Alexander's legacy. Alexander was a great and brave military leader. Alexander is thought to have always tried to copy his hero, Achilles. Achilles was one of the warriors in the Iliad by Homer. When he died, Alexander was the most powerful ruler in the ancient world. That is one reason we call him Alexander the Great. A legacy is what a person leaves to other people when he or she dies. Alexander's legacy was a world that knew about Greek culture. Wherever Alexander's army went, they spread the Greek language, ideas, and art. This is another reason why he is called Alexander the Great. Alexander's accomplishments were the beginnings of the Hellenistic era. Hellenistic means, like the Greeks. The Hellenistic era is the time when Greek ideas spread to non-Greek people in all the lands Alexander had conquered. Alexander wanted the Macedonians, the Greeks, the Egyptians, and the Persians to unite under a single empire. It did not happen. After Alexander died, his generals fought with each other. The empire fell apart. It became 4 separate Hellenistic kingdoms: Macedonia, Pergamum, Egypt, and the Seleucid Empire. The kings often gave jobs to Greeks or Macedonians. It was one way to control the government. By 100 BC, Alexandria was the largest city in the Mediterranean world. Its library had the largest number of writings in ancient times. The Hellenistic kings built many other cities, too. These cities needed many workers. The kings asked Greeks and Macedonians to move to these cities. These colonists helped spread the Greek culture into Egypt and as far east as India. Hellenistic arts. During the Hellenistic era, scientists, writers, philosophers, and poets moved to the new Greek cities in Egypt and Southwest Asia. Many came to use Alexandria's library. It had more than 500,000 scrolls. Alexandria also had a museum that brought people to study and do research. The Hellenistic kings built new cities and rebuilt old ones. They brought in Greek architects to design the new baths, temples, and theaters in the Greek style. The kings and other rich citizens hired Greek sculptors to make statues. Hellenistic sculptors developed new styles. They did not carve ideal versions of the perfect human body. They showed people more realistically. They even showed people being angry or sad. Writers wrote drama, poetry, and histories at this time, but most of this writing has been lost or destroyed. Apollonius of Rhodes wrote an epic poem called Argonautica. It is about Jason, his crew, and their adventures sailing the seas. Another poet, Theocritus, wrote short poems about nature and its beauty. Athens was still the center of Greek drama. Writers in Athens invented a new kind of comedy. The plays were about love and relationships of ordinary people. Menander was the best known of these new playwrights. He lived from 343 BC to around 291 BC. Thinkers and scientists. During this time, the most famous philosophers still went to Athens. The 2 most important Hellenistic philosophers were Epicurus and Zeno. Epicurus developed Epicureanism. This philosophy taught people that happiness should be the goal of life. Today, Epicurean means a love of good food or comfortable things. To Epicurus, happiness meant spending time with friends and not worrying. A thinker named Zeno developed Stoicism. Stoics believed that happiness came from following logic and reason. Emotions, like anger or sadness, caused problems. Today we call someone a Stoic if they do not seem to be affected by joy or sadness. Stoics also believed that people were happy when they did the duty to the community. Science flourished during the Hellenistic era. Scientists of that time had only simple instruments, but they performed experiments and made discoveries. Aristarchus was an astronomer. Astronomers study stars, planets, and other objects outside the Earth's atmosphere. Aristarchus said that the Sun was at the center of the universe and that Earth went around the Sun. Other astronomers thought he was wrong. Eratosthenes was a scientist in charge of Alexandria's library. He figured out that Earth was round. He also measured the circumference of Earth, or how big around it was. The estimate that Eratosthenes made was only 185 miles, 298 kilometers, off the actual distance. Euclid was a mathematician who wrote Elements. The book teaches plane geometry, a branch of mathematics concerned with how points, lines, angles, and surfaces work together. Archimedes was also an inventor. He invented the catapult, a war machine that hurled rocks, arrows, and spears at the enemy. In 212 BC the Romans attacked Syracuse. The catapults worked so well that it took the Romans 3 years to capture Syracuse. Finally the Romans got inside the city walls. They massacred most of the people, including Archimedes. Hellenistic thinking and culture had long-lasting effects. More than 700 years after the Hellenistic era, The mathematician Hypatia lived in Alexandria. Like the earlier Greeks, she studied philosophy and mathematics. She believed in the use of reason instead of superstition. Greece and Rome. The four kingdoms that formed from Alexander's empire often fought wars against each other. Some Greek city-states became independent, but they did not have strong armies. They were not free for very long. Rome was a city-state in central Italy. In the late 200s BC, Rome conquered all of Italy. The Greeks tried to stop Rome. They supported Rome's enemies in wars. The Romans won all those wars, though. Soon, Rome gained control of the Greek mainland.